A man stands at the entrance of a tent. The tent is enormous, roughly the size of half a football field when you count the courtyard, and it sits at the center of a camp of 2 million people in the middle of the Sinai Desert. The man is not a priest. He is not a scholar. He is a shepherd or a farmer or a craftsman, and he has walked here this morning because he did something wrong. Maybe he knows exactly what it was. Maybe the guilt has been building for weeks. He is holding a lamb. And somewhere inside that tent, past the outer courtyard, past the bronze altar, past the laver, past the curtain, past the golden lampstand and the table of bread and the altar of incense, past all of that, behind a second curtain so thick it took 300 priests to move it, God is waiting. The question this man is carrying is not a theological question. It is the most personal question any human being has ever carried. It is there a way for someone like me to get close to a God like that? Leviticus is the answer. And before this video is over, I am going to tell you about a rope. A rope that the high priest of Israel tied to his ankle before he walked into the innermost chamber of that tent once a year. I am going to tell you why that rope existed, what it meant, and why, the moment you understand it, you will never read this book the same way again. But first, let's talk about why almost everyone skips this book. This is not a rule book nobody reads because Paul made it irrelevant. This is not a list of ancient ceremonies that died with the temple. This is not the boring middle section between the Exodus and the conquest of Canaan. This is a blueprint, a detailed, blood-marked, mercy-soaked architectural plan for how broken human beings can live in the presence of a God who is so far beyond them, so other, so utterly set apart, that even the ground near his presence can kill you. That is what we are getting into today. The book of Leviticus opens with a sentence that most people read right past. The Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. Not from the mountain, not from the storm, not from the burning bush at a distance, from inside the tent. God has moved in. He is no longer speaking to Moses from somewhere out there. He is already present, already dwelling, already waiting at an address. And the first word out of his mouth is an invitation into the most complicated question in all of Scripture. How do you get close to something holy? The Hebrew word is qodesh. It appears 152 times in the book of Leviticus, more than in any other book of the Bible. And most of us translate it as holy and picture something like a church with stained glass, or a very serious man in robes, or something vaguely religious and slightly boring. That is not what qodesh means. Qodesh means cut off, set apart, removed from ordinary use and given entirely to something or someone else. When the Bible calls God holy, it is not primarily saying he is morally perfect, though he is. It is saying he is other. He is in a category by himself. He is not on a spectrum with you, just further along. He is not a better version of what you are. He is so different from everything you have ever encountered that the ancient Israelites built their entire national life around one central project, figuring out how to be near him without being destroyed by the proximity. That sounds dramatic. But then you meet Nadab and Abihu. Nadab was Aaron's firstborn son. Aaron the high priest, the brother of Moses, the man who had stood at the Red Sea and watched the water divide. His sons Nadab and Abihu had been with Moses on the mountain. They had seen the God of Israel. They had eaten and drunk in his presence. They were not strangers to the sacred. They were the insiders, the ordained, the consecrated. And one day the text says simply, without warning, they took their censers, put fire in them, added incense, and offered it before the Lord. Unauthorized fire. Fire he had not commanded. The text does not pause. It does not give you a moment to prepare. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them. And they died before the Lord. Aaron said nothing. Moses turned to his brother and said, "This is what the Lord spoke of when he said, 'Among those who approach me I will be proved holy. In the sight of all the people I will be honored.'" And Aaron, who had just watched both his sons die on the best day of his professional life, the day his priesthood was inaugurated, Aaron held his peace. That silence is the loudest thing in the book of Leviticus. Pay attention to this, because this is the moment the whole book comes into focus. God is not being cruel, he is being clear. He is setting the boundary not to punish but to protect, to say, you cannot approach the holy on your own terms. Holiness is not a mood. It is not a feeling you manufacture on a good Sunday morning. It is a state of being, and the gap between where you are and where God is cannot be crossed by good intentions or religious enthusiasm. It can only be crossed by the right blood, at the right time in the right way. Here's what most people miss about the sacrifice system in Leviticus. We read it and think primitive. We read it and think brutal. We read it and think, what kind of God needs animals killed to feel better? But that is reading it backwards. The sacrifices were not for God. They were for the person at the gate holding the lamb. Think about that man again, the shepherd, the farmer, the craftsman standing at the entrance to the courtyard. He lays his hand on the head of the animal. The Hebrew is specific here. He presses down. He leans into it. And in that moment, the text suggests something is transferred. The weight of what he carries, the guilt, the failure, the thing he did or left undone moves, and the animal takes it, and the animal dies, and the man walks away clean. It is not primitive. It is one of the most psychologically honest things God ever designed, because the wages of sin is death and someone has to die. The only question Leviticus is asking, from the very first chapter to the very last, is this: who? And if you stay with me, I am going to show you the answer is not who most people expect. But first, if this kind of deep Bible teaching is what you are looking for, take a second right now and subscribe. We go through books of the Bible like this every week, and I don't want you to miss what's coming next. Here is something nobody tells you about Leviticus. It is not organized by topic. It is organized by distance. Every chapter, every law, every ceremony in this book is answering one question from one direction. How much closer can you get? The sacrifices in chapters 1 through 7, how do you approach it all? The priesthood in chapters 8 through 10, who gets to go further in? The purity laws in chapters 11 through 15, what disqualifies you from approaching? The Day of Atonement in chapter 16, what happens once a year when one man goes all the way in? The whole book is a map, and every road on that map leads to the same room. God designed 5 different offerings in Leviticus, and most people lump them together as animal sacrifice and move on. But each one is doing something different. The burnt offering, the olah, the one that goes up entirely in smoke, is not about guilt. It is about surrender, every part of the animal consumed. Nothing held back. It is the offering that says, I give you everything, not because I have to, but because you are worth everything. The peace offering is a meal. You bring an animal, the priest makes atonement, and then you eat, you, your family, the priests, together, in the presence of God. It is a dinner invitation into the courts of heaven. The sin offering is the one that catches people off guard, because the Hebrew word for sin here, chatat, also means to miss the mark. It is not only for intentional rebellion. It is for the times you aimed wrong, the times you meant well and still wounded someone, the times the gap between who you are and who you were made to be became visible. There is an offering for that. God anticipated it. He built the remedy before the wound. And here is the pattern that holds the whole system together. Every offering, every single one, involves substitution. Something else bears the cost. Something else takes the weight. You bring what you have, you press your hand on its head, and the transfer happens. The priest mediates, the blood is poured, and the record for that moment is clean. Stay with me, because this is where it gets remarkable. Once a year, once, not twice, not monthly, not whenever the mood struck. Once a year, on the 10th day of the 7th month, everything in Israel stopped. The Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, and it has been observed without interruption for 3,000 years. On that morning, Aaron the high priest did something he did on no other day of the year. He took off his golden vestments, the breastplate with 12 stones, one for each tribe, the ephod, the robe, the turban, all of it came off, and he put on simple white linen, just white, because he was not entering as the high priest of Israel that day. He was entering as a man, just a man in white linen carrying blood. 2 goats were brought to the entrance of the tabernacle. The high priest cast lots over them, 1 lot for the Lord, 1 lot for Azazel. The goat that fell to the Lord was sacrificed, its blood collected. And then Aaron did what no other human being on earth was permitted to do. He walked through the outer courtyard, past the bronze altar still smoking, past the laver, through the first curtain into the holy place, past the lampstand, past the table, past the golden altar of incense. And then he stood before the second curtain, the inner curtain, the veil, 4 inches thick, woven from blue and purple and scarlet thread, 60 feet high. Behind it, the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat, the place where God said his presence would dwell between the cherubim, and Aaron walked through. He sprinkled the blood on the mercy seat, 7 times, the number of completeness. And somewhere in that silent, incense-thick room, the atonement, the kippur, the covering happened. The sins of an entire nation for an entire year covered. Then he walked back out, and the second goat was brought forward. Aaron placed both hands on its head, both hands, pressing down with the full weight, and he confessed over it every sin, every rebellion, every failure of Israel for the entire year. And a man led that goat out into the wilderness, into the uninhabited land, and it was never seen again. The Mishnah tells us a scarlet thread was tied to the gate of the temple on Yom Kippur. When the scapegoat reached the wilderness, the thread turned white. Every year for generations, the people of Israel watched that thread, and every year it turned white. Isaiah wrote it centuries before the ceremony was complete. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. This is not religion. This is not ritual for ritual's sake. This is God in extraordinary, painstaking, blood-marked detail showing his people something they could not yet fully see. There is a way in. There is a way to be clean. There is a way for someone carrying everything you are carrying to stand in the presence of everything he is. But it will cost something, and the cost was never really the goat. Now, the rope. There is a detail about Yom Kippur that does not appear in the text of Leviticus itself. It comes from the oral tradition of Israel recorded in the Talmud, referenced by Jewish historians, passed down through generations of priests who performed this ceremony year after year after year. And when you hear it, you will understand why I told you to hold on to it from the beginning. Before the high priest walked through the inner veil on Yom Kippur, a rope was tied to his ankle. A long rope, long enough to reach back through the curtain, through the holy place, out to where the other priests waited in the outer court. And the reason for the rope was this: if the high priest was not sufficiently prepared, if there was unconfessed sin, if his heart was not right, if he had not followed the purification rites with complete precision, he would die in the presence of God. And no other priest was permitted to enter and retrieve him. So they tied a rope to his ankle, so they could pull him out. Think about what that means. The holiest man in Israel on the holiest day of the year, performing the holiest act in the entire Jewish calendar, and he walked into that room not knowing for certain whether he would walk back out. Every single year. The rope was not a formality. The rope was a confession. It said, "Even I am not sure I am clean enough. Even I, who have spent the entire year preparing, who have bathed and prayed and sacrificed and confessed, even I walk through this curtain knowing the gap between what I am and what dwells in here might be too wide." You have stood outside a room like that. Maybe it was a hospital corridor, the kind where the doctor comes to find the family, and you are the family, and you are standing there knowing the news on the other side of that door might break something in you permanently. Maybe it was a courtroom. Maybe it was a conversation you had to have with someone you had wounded, and you stood outside their door for 10 minutes before you could make yourself knock. Maybe it is simply the middle of the night, 3 in the morning, when the thing you did or the thing done to you or the gap between the life you have and the life you thought you would have sits on your chest and will not move. That is the feeling Leviticus is addressing. That specific weight. That specific question: is there a way for someone carrying all of this to get close to God? And here is the answer the whole book has been building toward. The writer of Hebrews, a Jewish follower of Jesus, writing to Jewish believers who understood every syllable of what he was saying, looked at everything in Leviticus, all of it, every sacrifice and every offering and every drop of blood and every Yom Kippur and every rope, and he wrote this: Jesus has entered not into holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true things, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Not with the blood of goats and calves, with his own blood, once, not annually, once. This is not a story about a religion being replaced by a better religion. This is not a story about rules being swapped for grace. This is not a story about the Old Testament God and the New Testament God being different people with different personalities. This is one story, one unbroken line of mercy, running from that man at the gate with his lamb all the way to a hill outside Jerusalem where the final high priest walked into death, not dragged out by a rope, but walking in freely because he was not merely clean enough to enter the presence of holiness. He was the holiness. And when he died, when the moment came, the Gospel of Matthew tells us the veil of the temple tore. From top to bottom, not from the bottom up as a man would tear it, from the top down. As if something on the other side had reached through and opened the door. The room that killed people for getting too close was suddenly open, not because holiness became less dangerous, but because the one barrier between broken human beings and a holy God had finally, permanently been dealt with. No more rope needed. So here is what we have found in the book everyone skips. Takeaway 1. Leviticus is not about ritual. It was never about ritual. It is about the problem of proximity, the oldest problem in human experience. How does a broken person get close to a holy God? Every law, every offering, every restriction in this book is answering that one question. The ceremonies were not the point. Access was the point. Nearness was the point. God did not design an elaborate religious system because he enjoys religion. He designed it because he wanted to live among his people and needed to show them in the most concrete terms possible. What that would cost? Takeaway 2, every chapter of Leviticus was a shadow. The writer of Hebrews calls it exactly that, a shadow of the good things that were coming. A shadow is not an illusion. A shadow is proof that something real is casting it. Every sacrifice pointed forward. Every Yom Kippur pointed forward. Every rope pointed forward. The entire system was a centuries-long sermon about one person, and when that person finally arrived, the sermon ended because the reality had come. Takeaway 3, you are the man at the gate. You are still him. You are standing at the entrance of something you are not sure you are clean enough to enter, holding whatever it is you have brought, your failures, your doubts, your grief, your years of distance from God, your middle-of-the-night wait. And the answer Leviticus gives you, the answer the whole Bible gives you, is that the door is already open. Not because the holiness became less serious, but because someone took the full weight of the distance, walked through the veil on your behalf, and left it open from the other side. You do not need a rope. The way is clear. Which part of Leviticus surprised you most today? Was it the rope, the scarlet thread, or something else entirely? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if this is the kind of scripture teaching you want more of, subscribe right now. Next time, we are going inside another book of the Bible that most people have completely misread, and I promise you, it will change how you read everything around it. The man at the gate came holding a lamb. He walked away clean. 2,000 years later, on a Friday afternoon outside Jerusalem, the lamb came holding nothing and walked into the weight of everything we carry. That is Leviticus. That is the blueprint. That is the holiness no one told you was hiding in the book everyone skips.